15 seconds. Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff at a Dragon return to Space Launch Complex 40.
Tons of science and cargo take flight on NASA's SpaceX 30th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Falcon 9 at 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Pitching downrange, hearing good calls of performance. Nominal trajectory as Falcon 9 and Dragon arc out to the northeast.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And during ascent, we will tilt or gimbal our engines, guiding the rocket into what we call a gravity turn. Through this turn, the vehicle is flying both up and horizontally away from the launch pad. Now, this rocket typically needs to go about 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to make it to orbit and avoid being pulled back down to Earth. So moments ago, we did throttle the engines down in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure, in just a couple seconds.
Max Q.
There was that call out for max Q. And coming up, we have a few events in quick succession, starting with main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, second engine startup 1, and the start of the boost back burn for the first stage.
MVAC is chilling.
There's the call out. The MVAC engine on the second stage is chilling in, getting ready for startup. Now, the first of these events is main engine cutoff, or MECO, where the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage will shut down in preparation for stage separation, which is where stage 1 and 2 will separate from each other, with the first stage making its way back down to Earth and the second stage performing second engine start 1, which is where we ignite that single Merlin vacuum engine on board the second stage. Now, the boost back burn will then start on the first stage. This burn helps assist the vehicle flip back around and reorient itself back to land. MECO starting in just a couple seconds.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
And ignition. Stage 1 boost back startup.
There you heard and saw those events happening back to back. Awesome views of the first stage flipping back around as it performs its boost back burn. Again, we had main engine cutoff of the first stage, stage separation, second engine start on the second stage, and that first stage doing the awesome flip as it starts its boost back burn. Now, this burn is a little under a minute, so we have about 20 seconds left in this burn. And about 3 minutes after that, we will have 2 additional burns on the first stage to prepare to land back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral. We are at T plus 3 minutes and 30 seconds here in today's mission. CRS-30 is SpaceX's
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
There's that confirmation for the boost back shutdown of the first stage.
Nominal trajectory.
And a nominal trajectory. As again, CRS-30 is SpaceX's 27th launch this year. And we are coming up on the entry burn of the first stage, as well as second engine cutoff. On those live views of the first stage, you can see the attitude control system creating those beautiful puffs of white gas. And that's nitrogen from the cold gas thrusters of the attitude control system. And around T plus 6 minutes and 30 seconds, you should see on your screen the first stage's entry burn. And for the entry burn, we relight 3 of the M1D engines on the first stage, starting with the center engine 9, followed shortly by engines 1 and 5, which slows the vehicle down as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. We need to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which helps us to recover and reuse the first stage. And second stage on the right, you can see beautiful views of the Earth in the background and that Merlin vacuum engine heating up as it performs its burn. Again, we are a little over a minute to the start of our first stage entry burn. You can see the first stage on those live views on your left with 2 of the 4 hypersonic grid fins deployed, helping steer that first stage down as it makes its way back home to Earth. Now you can see the telemetry on the bottom left and right hands of your screen. The right-hand side is the second stage carrying our Dragon capsule, and the left-hand side is the first stage. You can see the second stage speeding up as it is performing its burn, and the first stage is coming back down towards the Earth's atmosphere with the altitude decreasing. Really cool views from the attitude control system of the first stage. Just about 20 seconds from the start of our first stage entry burn, we should be able to see really cool views of that burn from those views on the left of your screen.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There is the start of the stage 1 entry burn, and this is a 3-engine burn on the first stage of Falcon 9.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
There you
Stage
saw
1 FTS has safed.
really cool views of the end of the first stage entry burn and
Both
the flight
stages nominal trajectory.
and the call-outs for nominal trajectory and the flight termination system being safed. Now, the first stage that is supporting today's mission has just performed this entry burn for the 6th time. Falcon 9 is the world's first orbital class reusable rocket, and this allows SpaceX to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives
Stage 1 transonic.
down the cost of access to space. Now, coming up, we have that landing burn starting in just a few moments. There's the start of
Stage 1 landing burn.
Start of that landing burn. Really cool view of Cape Canaveral coast.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Wow, wonderful views of that first stage landing.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Back at landing zone 1, looking pristine there, and there you have it.
Guidance.
That landing marks SpaceX's 286th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including the first stage landings for Falcon 9.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
And Heavy. You heard that call out that stage 2 FTS is safe, getting ready for second engine cutoff here in just under 10 seconds.
MVAC shutdown.
There is that second engine cutoff with the MVAC shutdown call out, waiting for confirmation of a good orbital insertion.
Nominal orbit insertion.
There is that confirmation of good orbit. It looks like we are on track for Dragon separation in just a few minutes, just before the T++ 12-minute mark. It has been a great launch so far. As I mentioned earlier, today's launch was the first for our upgraded Dragon to be flying from Slick 40 after we stopped flying the older version of Dragon back in 2020. To support our growing launch manifest, we've made new upgrades to Space Launch Complex 40, including a brand new tower and access arm, which enables more efficient late load operations as well as human spaceflight missions. Now, with these updates, we are on our way to having 2 launch pads capable of supporting flying humans to space. You can see really cool views of the MVAC engine and the Earth in the background from the second stage. And in addition to flying cargo to support crew on board the space station, SpaceX also enables researchers the opportunity to fly critical science to orbit on Dragon, which has carried over 1,000 research experiments to and from low Earth orbit and the International Space Station since 2012. Enabling research in space paves the way for us to explore beyond Earth and make life multiplanetary. And now we are waiting for Dragon to separate from Falcon 9's second stage. To recap so far, we had an on-time liftoff at 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time. Everything has proceeded nominally so far. Stage separation occurred at about 2.5 minutes into flight, and that was followed by a successful landing of Falcon 9's first stage at Landing Zone 1 back in Cape Canaveral, Florida. That was the 6th landing for that particular Falcon 9 first stage. And for those of you following along, this Dragon capsule has also supported CRS-22, CRS-24, and CRS-27, which were 3 additional cargo resupply missions to the International Space Station. At about T plus 8.5 minutes, we had a successful second engine cutoff, followed by confirmation of a good orbital insertion. The vehicle is now coasting with Dragon attached, and we are just about 30 seconds away from spacecraft separation. We're seeing great views from the second stage with the Earth and the Sun in the background as it prepares to separate Dragon so that Dragon can begin its journey to the International Space Station. Just a few seconds from payload deployment. You can see Dragon floating away there. It's very exciting to see. Dragon is drifting away from Falcon 9's second stage there, confirming good spacecraft separation. Now, SpaceX is honored to be a part of NASA's Commercial Resupply Services initiative to deliver critical cargo to the space station, and we thank NASA for entrusting us with today's mission. For those of you following along, you'll know that this mission marks our 27th of the year. Congratulations to the SpaceX team. We're just in March, and we're already launched in partnership with NASA missions like Axiom 3, Cygnus, and PACE, Intuitive Machines, Crew 8, and more. You can check spacex.com/launches for up-to-date missions and schedules. But that will do it for me here in Hawthorne. But I'm handing it over to Gary to take us through Dragon nose cone opening. Gary?
Hey, thank you, Yome. We were following along from here in Mission Control Houston, a wonderful launch of Dragon from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Great to see Dragon in orbit and starting its journey on the way to the International Space Station. We're continuing our coverage here in Mission Control Houston, awaiting for the nose cone to deploy. The nose cone is at the very tip of the Dragon spacecraft. Once deployed, exposes the 4 forward bulkhead Dracos. These Draco thrusters will execute the series of maneuvers necessary to raise its orbit and meet up with the destination of Dragon's launch today, the International Space Station. Of course, after separation, it is carrying 3 tons of supplies, including science, as well as some food to the International Space Station. A common question we get is what sorts of treats and food are inside Dragon that the Expedition 70 crew aboard station is awaiting. We did receive word that there is a fresh food kit, including some fruits and vegetables like citrus, apples, and cherry tomatoes inside Dragon right now. There's also 2 crew-requested coffee kits and 60, that's 60, bulk overwrap bags. These are standard bobs containing some standard food menu items as well as some crew preference choices. You're getting a live look at the second stage, now transferring to the control rooms. On the left side, you see the SpaceX mission control teams over in Hawthorne, California, that oversaw today's launch and will continue to monitor Dragon on its journey to the International Space Station over the next day and a half. The teams you see there on the right are here with me in Mission Control Houston, the International Space Station flight control teams monitoring the orbiting complex, and of course the operations jointly with Hawthorne, the flight controllers there. Joint operations between the two teams you see here will come a little bit closer to when Dragon is in its final approach phase, just about 2 hours or so prior to docking. Docking is scheduled for early Saturday morning. Teams here are waiting for the nose cone deploy of Dragon, and we're standing by and continuing our coverage. Now, a little bit about the coming days and what Dragon and the journey that Dragon will undergo. So now that we are past the spacecraft separation from the Falcon 9 and awaiting that nose cone deploy, we're in the activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. During this phase, Dragon is configured for on-orbit operations. The phase begins after separation that we just saw from the Falcon 9 and ends with the completion of the final co-elliptic burn. The initial orbit today is about 190 kilometers by 210 kilometers, those values representing the perigee and apogee of the orbit, or the lowest and highest points over the Earth. Not a perfect circle, more like a very slight ellipse. So over the next day and a half, Dragon will execute a series of burns which will gradually raise its orbit to align more closely with the station. There are 5 major burns where the Draco thrusters on Dragon will fire and bring the spacecraft close to the station before we begin the final approach maneuvers. Let's go ahead and review that now. First is the first major burn, the phase burn. This is performed at the first apogee or the highest point of the initial orbit and raises Dragon's perigee or the lowest point to a higher altitude. The next burn, which based on the orbital data that we're seeing, is the boost burn, which raises Dragon's orbit until it reaches an altitude just about 10 kilometers lower than the space station. This is followed soon after by the close co-elliptic burn to place Dragon on an orbit that's roughly co-elliptic with the space station. It means the crew, or the Dragon itself, will be about 10 kilometers lower than the station during the entire orbit around the Earth. The fourth maneuver is the transfer burn, where we're raising Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers below the station. Then we round everything out with what's called a final co-elliptic burn to once again maintain that orbit just beneath the station, but this time on a plane that is 2.5 kilometers below. We did get word that the nose cone is starting to deploy. This sequence takes just a couple of minutes until it's fully open, and again exposing the forward bulkhead Dracos that will execute the maneuvers you see here on your screen. The final co-elliptic burn you see there on the screen will lead us to the approach initiation. This is the final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the space station and beginning integrated operations with the team here in Mission Control Houston and the teams over in Hawthorne, California. During the approach, the SpaceX flight controllers will work in tandem with the teams here to execute, to test out a number of systems and test communications between the spacecraft and the station with a system called C2V2, which stands for Common Communication for Visiting Vehicles. Sets up a data stream between the Dragon and the station. We'll see that maneuver on Saturday, early morning, bringing the approach initiation burn and bringing Dragon just below the International Space Station. Teams you see here on your screen are monitoring the Dragon after its separation. To begin the activation and rendezvous phase, we are opening the nose cone. We're about halfway through and tracking good progress. Once it is fully opened, they'll perform a series of checks to work on those forward bulkhead Draco engines. These are on the very tip of the Dragon spacecraft and will execute those burn maneuvers that we just went over. 20 minutes after the launch of NASA's SpaceX 30th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Still continuing to follow along, the teams here are monitoring the opening of the nose cone at the end of the Dragon spacecraft, again exposing those forward bulkhead Dracos. We'll continue to cover this mission until that is fully open. So again, the nose cone is fully deployed and the teams are checking those forward bulkhead Dracos. That'll begin the sequence in that activation and rendezvous phase to begin the series of 5 major burns to raise Dragon's orbit and get closer to the International Space Station. So now that the nose cone is deployed, Dragon is ready for those phasing burns, as I mentioned, to the International Space Station. With a successful orbital insertion, I'm now joined on the phone by Christy Duplishin, Deputy Manager of the International Space Station Transportation Integration Office. Christy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Hey, Christy, you had the pleasure of being at the Kennedy Space Center for launch. What was going through your mind as you witnessed yet another cargo mission successfully launch into orbit?
Oh my, yes. Even though it's the 30th cargo mission for SpaceX, it never gets old. I do still get nervous before each mission, and I think back to something one of my mentors said when I worked flight control back in the shuttle days. He said, if you're not nervous before a launch, then you aren't remembering what it means to do this. And so I think that sums up how I felt. And before each mission, regardless of how many times it happens, and I was adequately nervous. So I'm also thinking about all the work that goes into making the launch happen. There's so many dedicated and hardworking people that work every day to make these flights happen, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. So you can't just help but smile.
It's so true, Christy, and really the team is putting a lot of work in, not just for this launch, but many others. The space station right now is a high-traffic area. We've seen a lot of traffic before this launch, and we'll continue to see more. What are some of the challenges for your office during a busy season of traffic aboard the International Space Station?
That's absolutely true. It has been very busy over the last few months. We still have several flights ahead of us. Our team is great at keeping up with all of these vehicles that are coming and going. As we prepare for these missions, our team makes sure that the vehicles and teams are ready to fly. One of the things I enjoy most about this job is the opportunity to work with the different commercial providers that are in different stages of development. I'd say that one of our challenges is to make sure that we continue to evolve to meet our commercial provider needs as we continue in our goal of commercializing low Earth orbit. We're here to support them and help them be successful. So it's a challenge and a privilege as we continue on these goals.
It's important, right? There's a lot happening, and we're seeing more traffic and more launches than ever before. Now, when considering the traffic, science is key, and Dragon has the important science objective to deliver science and also to station and also return that science back to Earth. How does the criticality of science fold into your office's planning?
Yeah, that's a good question. Science is key. My office has the responsibility of providing the service to get all of the science and all the cargo, even the hardware that we need for different activities on orbit. We get it all there to station. And so we work closely with the Research and Integration Office to understand the needs of those research experiments and that each provider has for each of those missions. So, for example, that's whether there are any time constraints that the science has when we load it on the vehicle for launch, or if the experiment needs any special accommodations while it's in Dragon. We work with our science team to make sure we understand that and then communicate that to our vehicle provider. Then we look across missions to make sure that we have a flight lined up to be able to be ready to fly the science when it's ready to go. And then also we have to return some of the science. So we also make sure that we have a flight ready to bring that science home when it's ready. So we work very closely with them because we are providing the ride.
A lot of work, and it's absolutely critical. Christy Duplichin, NASA Deputy Manager of the International Space Station Transportation Integration Office, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Dragon will begin the methodical approach to the station with phasing burns to, again, close the distance between the cargo spacecraft and the orbiting laboratory. This will take approximately a day and a half, with approach and docking to the International Space Station expected early in the morning on Saturday, March 23rd. Join us on NASA TV and NASA Plus for our coverage of the final approach and docking of this spacecraft, beginning at 4:30 a.m. Central Time, 5:30 a.m. Eastern on Saturday for a docking expected near 6:30 a.m. Central, 7:30 a.m. Eastern. Visit nasa.gov for the latest updates on our coverage and expected docking time as we follow the operations through the next few days. Thank you for following our joint coverage of NASA's SpaceX 30th Commercial Resupply Services launch. That'll wrap it up for us here in Houston, as well as our colleagues in Hawthorne. Until next time, this is Mission Control Houston.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're live here in Mission Control Houston, the International Space Station Flight Control Room at Johnson Space Center in Texas.
Port hatch is closed. We're going to be sending some state commands.
The departure of Crew 7 this morning comes just about a week after the arrival of Crew 8 to the International Space Station, bringing 4 new crew members. So over the last week, we've had a total of 11 astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station. The departure today will bring it back down to the 7 crew members we typically keep aboard.
Touch temperature LED is green.
We got the green.
And with that little bit of communication, we just heard that the hatch inside Dragon Endurance is now closed. All 4 returning crew members, they're getting your first view inside the spacecraft this morning. They are now inside. Looks like Andy Mogensen there. He has been serving as the commander of the International Space Station, and yesterday that was handed over to Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko. Currently aboard the International Space Station, we have Commander Oleg Kononenko of Roscosmos, along with Nikolai Chub, NASA astronaut Laurel O'Hara, NASA astronaut Matt Dominic, NASA astronaut Mike Fink, NASA astronaut Jeanette Epps, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grebyankin.
Undock sequence commanded.
And we did just hear that call up to the crew that the undock sequence has begun.
Umbilicals are demated, nominal.
And we are hearing that the umbilicals have retracted between Dragon and the International Space Station. So the next milestone that we'll be looking for is for those sets of hooks to fully retract. There's 2 sets of 6 hooks, so 12 hooks in all. And once those hooks have separated, then there will be a short thruster firing that occurs of the Draco engines to help push Dragon back away from the International Space Station. Before they depart the International Space Station, let's take a moment to get to know the crew we're bringing home tomorrow. Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Mogbelli hails from Baldwin, New York, and earned a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School. She also graduated with honors from the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. As an AH-1W Super Cobra pilot and Marine Corps test pilot, she has flown more than 150 combat missions. In all, she has accrued 2,000 hours of flight time in more than 25 different aircraft. At the time of her selection as an astronaut, Mogbelli was testing H-1 helicopters and serving as the Quality Assurance and Avionics Officer for VMX-1. She's also the proud mom of twin girls. With this mission, she will have logged an estimated 199 days in space during her first flight, including 6 hours and 42 minutes during her first spacewalk. Today, she is the commander of Crew 7.
Sitting next to Jasmine is pilot Andreas Mogensen. This is Mogensen's second trip to the space station. His first was as the flight engineer for the ESA IRIS mission in 2015. He was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and graduated with an international baccalaureate from the Copenhagen International School, a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from Imperial College London, and a doctorate in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. In 2015, Mogensen became the first Danish person to go to space and currently is serving as the European Astronaut Liaison Officer to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. With this mission, he will have logged 209 days in space across 2 flights.
In the role of mission specialist is Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Satoshi Furukawa. Furukawa's interest in space began when he was just 5 years old and saw the Apollo 11 moon landing on TV. Furukawa was also a fan of the Japanese TV space hero Ultra 7. His professional career began as a medical doctor, but after seeing a news report about Japan auditioning for new astronauts to do science experiments on the space station, he decided to apply. He was selected by the National Space Development Agency of Japan to be an astronaut candidate in 1999, and his first mission to the space station was as flight engineer for Expedition 28 and 29 that launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in June 2011. Following this mission, he will have logged 366 days in space across his 2 trips.
And to round it out, mission specialist Konstantin Borisov was selected to be a cosmonaut in 2018, and this was his first trip to space. He has a Bachelor of Economics from the Russian Academy of Economics, a Master of Science in Operations Research and Systems Analysis from Warwick University in Coventry, UK, and a Master in Aircraft Life Support Systems from the Moscow Aviation Institute. He has worked for companies such as Volvo and the Boston Consulting Group. He's also an experienced freediving instructor and an international freediving judge. He will end this mission logging 199 days in space.
Thanks, Sandra. We just heard that separation is confirmed. The International Space Station and Dragon flying 261 statute miles over Hawaii at 10:20 a.m. Central Time, 11:20 a.m. Eastern Time. Just received confirmation of a nominal depart zero burn.
Is complete and nominal.
Depart zero burn being a very short burn using the service section Draco thrusters to break some stiction from Dragon and the International Space Station, officially marking its departure. We are standing by for Depart Burn 1, which will increase the opening rate between the spacecraft and the station. Again, at this time, the crew are all suited up and in their seats. They'll have an opportunity to get out of those suits shortly and prepare for their longer ride home.
Standing by for confirmation that the Depart Burn 1 has begun. And we did hear that that burn has begun.
Again, this burn is only 22 seconds long, so it's a pretty short burn.
And Dragon, SpaceX, Depart Burn 1 is complete and nominal. As a reminder, we will be deactivating the big loop following the approach ellipsoid exit.
Dragon copies. Depart 1 burn is complete. And station from Dragon, we wish you the best of luck. For those staying on board on Expedition 71, we hope it does filled with laughter and fulfilling science as ours was. For Laurel, we'll see you in a couple weeks, and we left you some peanut butter and tortillas in Node 1.
And on board Dragon, the crew is going to begin to work on getting out of their spacesuits for the journey ahead. They are splashing down early tomorrow morning, so they're going to get comfortable. They do wear those spacesuits during some of the more dynamic phases of the mission, such as launch, as well as docking and undocking, and of course, splashdown. But now that they have successfully undocked from the International Space Station at 8:20 Pacific, about 12.5 minutes ago, they are able to get out of those spacesuits, get comfortable, maybe have a meal, and just enjoy their last few hours in orbit.
Crew 7 was the first crew in which all 4 seats were occupied by a member of a different nationality or a different partner country. Jasmine Magbelli is our NASA astronaut aboard, joined by Andreas Mogensen of ESA, the European Space Agency. Satoshi Furukawa is from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA, and Konstantin Borisov comes to us from Roscosmos. It was the first flight for Jasmine and Konstantin, and the second flight for both Andreas and Satoshi.
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground, you have a go for your preparations for crew off duty at your discretion. We're ready to support in case you'd like to talk to Surgeon, and a reminder to set your audio destinations to ground.
SpaceX, Dragon on Dragon to ground. We copy all, and now we're going to configure for crew off duty.
Good readback, Dragon.
And those words from the ground up to NASA astronaut Jasmine Magbelli, letting them know that now that they're out of the approach ellipsoid, they can get configured for a crew off-duty period as they wait splashdown early tomorrow morning. The crew is going to get out of their spacesuits and get comfortable for the remainder of their journey. So again, the crew is now out of the approach ellipsoid, which means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours. Again, even if it lost all maneuvering, and we call that a safe free drift trajectory.
And with that, now that NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, ESA astronaut Andy Mogeson, JAXA astronaut Satoshi Furukawa, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Konstantin Borisov have departed the International Space Station, it will take them about 18.5 hours until they make their way back down to Earth. The crew is currently doffing their spacesuits, or they may have actually completely gotten out of their spacesuits to settle in for the flight home. And today, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida at 5:50 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning, or 2:50 a.m. Pacific Time, on March 12th, followed by the crew getting picked up by sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return to Earth for Dragon and our Crew 7 astronauts.
And though our coverage here in Hawthorne is wrapping up for this morning, we will turn it over to the NASA team in Houston to take us through the next phases of the Crew 7 mission. Our friends at the Johnson Space Center will provide continuous live audio-only coverage along Crew 7's journey home until we rejoin from Hawthorne approximately 1 hour prior to splashdown. You can find the audio-only link by visiting nasa.gov/live and clicking the mission audio link, or searching for NASA Mission Audio Live Feed on YouTube at go.nasa.gov/live-ISS.
Meanwhile, we will rejoin for live visual coverage starting roughly 1 hour prior to splashdown. And as always, you can find mission updates on X at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.